Let's take you now to Washington, D.C. and speak to Sigurd Neubauer, who specialises in US policy towards the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf region. Thanks for being with us on the programme. So the US, I guess, has effectively said it's satisfied with Qatar's stance on terrorism now. But Saudi Arabia and its allies have simply dismissed that, really, ahead of that meeting in Jeddah tomorrow with Rex Tillerson. So how do you see that meeting with Tillerson and the four Arab states playing out?
Well, I think that we should reserve judgment until Tillerson meets with the four foreign ministers tomorrow. What I think is important to emphasize is that there is a coherent U.S. response to this crisis in the region. It is clear from the president down to the Secretary of State and Defense that this crisis is an irritant, if not a distraction, to the U.S. agenda, which at the moment centers on defeating ISIS fully in Mosul and then moving on to Raqqa in Syria, and also keeping Iran at bay. So if you look at Tillerson's visit today in Qatar, it should put to rest allegations that Doha is some sort of a lax environment for terror financing, because it should reassure Saudi Arabia and its regional partners that the appropriate measures are taken to crack down on counter-terrorism financing.
Yeah, I'm not sure how coherent the US policy towards the Gulf crisis has been. I mean, Tillerson, very careful today to quote President Trump during that trip to Qatar. But is it not clear that for a while the State Department and the president had very different opinions and policies when it comes to Qatar?
That is certainly how it started. I would say that there was a game changer that changed the narrative, and that was when President Trump called his Egyptian counterpart al-Sisi on Thursday last week on the phone. You may recall the subsequent press conference in Cairo where the foreign minister had planned what appeared to be escalatory measures against Qatar, instead reduced their demands. So I think that from that point on, it was very clear that the United States had changed its position from a state of confusion to on one hand, seeking to bring the GCC crisis to an end, but also to underscore that this is a key U.S. foreign policy priority to resolve this and immediately.
Do you think Saudi Arabia knew that Rex Tillerson was going to go to Doha just to sign this memorandum of understanding? Do you think Saudi and its allies had any idea that that was going to happen?
Well, I mean, as you know, this crisis has played out in the media, and there have been multiple leaks, including yesterday before Tillerson's arrival. My assumption is that there is careful coordination with the various parties to this conflict in order to bring this crisis to an end. And like I said, I think that that Tillerson would have coordinated in advance with the Saudis that this memorandum would be signed. And I also would assume that President Trump would call the Saudi king ahead of Tillerson's arrival to ensure that this crisis comes to an end, so that it not just lingers on and becomes a media spat.
Sure, it certainly felt that there was movement today, obviously following that statement from Rex Tillerson and the Qatari foreign minister about the agreement on terrorism. The fact that the four Arab states then came out and said, you know, that's not enough, Qatar needs to do more, effectively almost dismissing the efforts of Rex Tillerson. How does this now progress during that meeting in Jeddah on Wednesday? Because presumably Saudi Arabia needs to somehow save face if it is actually to get out of this. If Rex Tillerson comes around and says, look, you know, you've done enough to Qatar now, enough is enough, you need to back off right now. Saudi Arabia has to get out of it, doesn't it, by saving face somehow?
Well, I think all parties need to save face, and if you look carefully at the situation, there's certainly a Qatari narrative, and the Qatari narrative is that this was never about counter-terrorism financing, but rather about its independent foreign policy. The Saudi narrative, on the other hand, is that Qatar has, through its foreign policy, created a lot of instability. So how do you reconcile these two narratives? And I think that once you take the terrorism financing issue off the table, it goes back to the parties within the GCC to resolve their foreign policy differences amongst each other. And I think that that's where the direction is heading.
Really good to get your analysis. Sigurd Neubauer joining us there from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you.